I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. A lot going on with the economy. And they have this big budget process, one big beautiful bill, as the president said. You all know I'm not a Trump hater. But I am worried about this bill. And I'm worried about how much debt they're taking on. I mean, you have Elon Musk complaining that, hey, we're only advisors. We're not, dictators, but we're advising. And you need to cut $2 trillion. And, then they have this bill that they want to have 20 trillion. They're going to have 20 trillion in 10 years. This is according to the people that wrote the bill. They're going to add 20 trillion in 10 years. We're paying $1.5 trillion in interest a year. No cutting. The cuts, one version of it where they won't happen until 2029. A little worrisome. So I brought somebody on to talk about the money. But before we go to him, Ray Dalio, he had Bridgewater Associates, big hedge fund, multi-billionaire. Ray Dalio says the risk to U.S. Treasury is even greater than what Moody's is saying. They just downgraded our debt. That's the third rating agency that downgraded U.S. debt. And let me go on about when he talks about the risk. Bridgewater Associates founder and billionaire Ray Dalio warned Monday that Moody's downgrade of the U.S. sovereign credit rating understates the threat to U.S. Treasury, saying the credit agency isn't taking into account the risk of the federal government. Wait for it. The risk of the federal government simply printing the money to pay its debt. He's worried about all the money printing. He's worried about, we're not going to default. We'll just print the money. And how much is then the money going to be devalued after that? And to talk about all that is John Rubino. John Rubino and his famous Substack. John Rubino, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Hey, Greg, good to talk to you again. Yeah, we do indeed have a lot to talk about this time.
With this, Ray Dalio he's worried about them. I know you downgraded the credit rating, but what he's saying is that the real risk isn't that we won't pay our bills. The real risk is that we'll pay our bills with tons of, digital money or printed money or whatever you want to call it. What say you?
Well, the story with Moody's downgrade isn't that they did it, that they moved the U.S. from AAA to one notch below AAA. It's that it's kind of insane that a government with debt that's 125% of GDP has an investment grade rating at all, right? Because they clearly are baking a gigantic currency crisis into the cake. And Ray Dalio, he gets it right, because the rating agency's excuse or explanation for the fact why the U.S. still has a investment grade credit rating is that a country with a printing press can never default, because it just creates enough money out of thin air to pay the interest on its bonds, and it can do that forever. Therefore, it's a AAA credit, which doesn't make any sense at all, because if you just print a lot of money out of thin air, use it to pay your debts, then your currency goes down in value, and you're paying back your creditors with depreciating currency, which is a form of default. So the credit rating agencies are only looking at the one kind of default where we just stop paying, and they're not looking at the other kind of default where we go ahead and pay, but in cheaper currency year after year, and we kind of stiff our creditors that way. So that's what's going to happen, and that's what Ray Dalio pointed out, is they're looking at one kind of risk, but not the other, bigger, more obvious risk. And that's why you don't want to own treasury bonds, because they're not going to not pay you the interest, but the interest will not cover inflation going forward. So you'll have a net real loss on your government bonds until they just crater, and then you have a massive capital loss too. So it's just not a good market right now. We should not be owning long-term government bonds of any of the major companies or countries.
Well, I'm back on camera with you here, and the 10-year Treasury, which was going down pretty significantly, it was got down in 4 in small change, and now it's back to 4.5%. And the 30-year Treasury hit 5% the other day, but nobody cares about the 30-year Treasury really, because mortgage debt's all set off of off the 10-year. But we're at 7% 30-year mortgages again, aren't we?
Yeah, we went back up to unsustainable interest rates really quickly, even though the Fed is still in cutting mode. It's not cutting aggressively or anything, but they're promising a couple of rate cuts this year. And for interest rates to go up while the Fed is, in theory, easing, means we're risking losing control of the financial markets. In other words, if the Fed can't actually control interest rates, we are monumentally screwed as a financial system. And that's kind of what we're headed for now. And the U.S., it's happening in the U.S. Our interest rates are going back up. But if you want to see an extreme case, look at Japan, because they have not just 30-year bonds, they have 40-year and 50-year bonds. Those things are cratering, which is to say the interest rates on those bonds are spiking. And that's what happens when a country just borrows way too much money and people lose faith in its paper. So, the long-term Japanese bonds used to be zero. Their yield used to be zero, and now it's 3% and change, which doesn't sound too much compared to the U.S. But the change from back when it was zero to today is huge, and so Japan, the U.S., Europe, the UK, China, all of these big countries with their fiat currencies are making basically the same mistakes, and they're all headed in the same direction. So what we're seeing right now is sort of the early stage of a currency death spiral, where interest rates start to go up and the government can't control that. And then the interest on the government's debt goes parabolic, and they have to borrow that interest, which means their next year's deficit is even higher, and so on, until things just break down. And we are at we're in the third inning of that process. And the last couple of innings of this game are just going to be hair raising, because they're going to be currency crises, which we have never seen in our lifetimes. It'll be like nothing we've ever seen in our lifetimes, but it'll be very similar to things that have happened in other countries prior to us coming along. Countries inflate away their currencies and have a currency collapse all the time. But just not lately. So we're heading into that stage, but none of us have ever seen it before. So fun times if you're a gold bug.
Well, I'm back on camera with you. I want to go back to Ray Dalio, what you said off camera. I didn't know this, and nobody says Ray Dalio gold bug, but he's a big gold guy. Talk about that.
Well, he is a big gold guy. See, he's a mainstream money manager, a very big one, hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars under management. And he's been very successful. But lately, he's been talking up gold and adding to his gold holdings because he sees this stuff coming. And when somebody like him jumps on the gold bandwagon, it carries a lot more weight than when somebody like me says buy gold, because I've always been saying that. But he's somebody who's been making a ton of money in other things, who's coming around to gold, and so he has, mainstream credibility, all you could ever want. So it's very meaningful when somebody like him starts talking like a gold bug, and he's doing that now. So who else did something really interesting just lately is Warren Buffett. He just flat out retired. And he's done that one other time in his life. He made a huge name for himself in the 60s and then announced that he just didn't understand these financial markets anymore. And he closed up his money management operation, he paid everybody back, and just went away for a while. And that was the 1970s, which was the only major currency crisis we've had in our lifetimes. So he walked away in anticipation of that. And now he's walking away again, although now he has a different excuse that he's, what is he, like 85 years old now? But still, that Warren Buffett is walking away from the financial markets and Ray Dalio is becoming a gold bug kind of tells you a lot. The biggest mainstream money managers in the world don't trust these markets and they're buying insurance. So, it took a lot longer to get here, but we're at a very recognizable place that gold bugs have been predicting for a long time. And where it goes from here, if it goes in the the predicted direction of a currency crisis and a currency reset, it's going to be very tempestuous. But it will involve a lot of opportunities. We can make a ton of money if this plays out the way it looks like it's going to play out. So we should all be paying attention for a lifetime opportunity to come along here and for us to jump on it.
It's so weird. Ray Dalio is buying gold at $3,200 an ounce. I mean, where does he see it going, right? I mean, if he's buying gold up here at 3,000, 2,800, He's not buying it for it to go up $50, right?
Yeah, he's buying it as insurance against currency collapse. And if you think, okay, after the currency crisis, we'll go back to a gold standard, which I think is a very reasonable scenario at this point, because the world's central banks are buying gold like crazy. And they're not buying oil, they're not buying Bitcoin, they're not buying silver, they're buying gold, which implies that they see a currency crisis coming that will lead to a reset that involves gold. Okay, so they're doing that. And if we were to decide to try to, for instance, back the US dollar with gold equal to, say, 40% of M1, which is a kind of narrow monetary aggregate, we got to go way above $10,000 an ounce to make that happen. So a monetary reset followed by a gold standard would involve gold way above 10,000, maybe $20,000 or $30,000 an ounce. That's just what the gold price would have to be to balance out all the currency that's out there. So it looked at that way, $3,000 an ounce doesn't sound like much at all. It implies gold might be a 10-bagger from here. And so I think Ray Dalio and the other mainstream money managers who are kind of shifting in that direction are thinking in those terms. They're thinking, all right, the ultimate end point of this process is way above today's gold price. Therefore, it's an undervalued asset. And that's why they're buying.
I'm going to get back with you in just a second. I want to talk about silver, because everybody says, ask about silver. But before I do, I want to talk about the wellness company. I want to talk about this product right here, which is the, hold on a minute, there you go, ivermectin, menbendazole. 60 million people have parasites. And this is FDA approved for parasites. Ivermectin, it's at 25 milligrams. It's double what the 12 milligram pills. And membendazole, which is like fenbendazole, but that's the human version of it. It's compounded together. The other thing about this is that I've had Dr. Peter McCullough on talking about how the off-label use of it. And one of the off-label use of this product, and it's you get 90 pills. You get 15% off with promo code USA Watchdog and free shipping. So it knocks it down. This is the price they have on it. It's pretty pricey, but this is a product that they think is, it's very expensive for them to put together with ivermectin and menbendazole put together. So with the 15% off and the free shipping, it's down around $500, but it's 90 pills. It's 90 days. You only take one of these, but to get rid of parasites. But this ivermectin menbendazole product is also good off-label. And Dr. Peter McCullough brought this up. And he talked about it used for removal of spike proteins. Now, some of the doctors are using it for that. Dr. Pierre Corey is using ivermectin. Dr. Elizabeth Eads is using menbendazole, which is pretty close to the same to it, and also ivermectin. And to reduce vax injuries. Also, you have this product that you can use for cancer, and Dr. Peter McCullough talked about that, off-label use of it. Lots of uses for it, very few places to get it. They're still, according to Dr. Elizabeth Eads, they're still restricting prescriptions for ivermectin because they don't want you to have it. But it's promo code USA Watchdog, 15% off, plus free shipping. It is the wellness company. Now back to John Rubino. John Rubino, silver's at about $33 an ounce. Gold is about 3,300 or a little less an ounce. Had a big day on Tuesday here. But what's going on with silver? It's 100 ounces of silver make an ounce of gold. What's your view on silver?
Silver is a great story because it's an industrial metal that's in deficit. In other words, industrial users are taking more silver off the market than mines are producing right now. And that's going to lead to a shortage that's, even if silver wasn't a monetary metal, you could just look at the supply and demand dynamics and think it was a buy at this price. And at the same time, it's a monetary metal that has been used as money for thousands of years and kind of trades in a range against gold, usually from 1/40th of an ounce of gold to 80 or 90 or so. In other words, when the gold-silver ratio, the number of ounces of silver it takes to buy an ounce of gold, hits 90. In the past, that has been a screaming buy. Silver very seldom gets cheaper than that before people start piling in and buying it like crazy. Now we're at 100. So silver is extremely historically cheap versus gold, and it is in high and growing demand as an industrial metal. So you put those two things together, and there are a lot of reasons to think that silver goes way up from here. And it's such a thinly traded market that if we get into a situation where industrial demand, for instance, missiles contain a lot of silver, apparently. So if missiles are being fired somewhere, that takes a lot of silver off the market. Solar panels use silver, and solar demand is going to grow going forward. So if we reach a point where the deficit turns into a shortage, and for instance, the COMEX Metals Exchange and other similar exchanges just can't get enough physical silver to satisfy the demand of people with futures contracts who want physical delivery, and there's a default, then you see silver go straight up. And the supply-demand dynamics right now make it completely possible that you could have an exchange default and send silver straight up. So silver could go from 35 to 50 in a scenario like that very easily. And then longer term, if we see gold going up from here and the gold to silver ratio goes down, in other words, silver gets less cheap relative to gold, you can see $100 silver very easily just because of that dynamic. So the silver story is great. I think it's a good idea to be stacking silver coins and bars right now and do it a little bit at a time, dollar cost average, but just let the pile build up over time. And I think when this plays out as it should, you'll be in great shape.
What about the war factor? I mean, Trump's in the Middle East. I think he did some good over there. But then he leaves, and Iran says, we're not going to stop enriching uranium. That's not going to happen. And then you have Trump saying, we can do the easy way or the hard way. And then you have, Zelensky and Putin. They're supposed to be talking, but yet, when you listen to Martin Armstrong, he's saying Ukraine's going to disappear. There's not going to be any peace. They won't agree to any deal where Russia gets all this land in the eastern part, which they've taken from eastern Ukraine. What about the war scenario? Do you factor that in when you're taking a look at the investment opportunity that you look at and you write about in your Substack?
Well, yeah. Chaos is good for precious metals and most real assets. In other words, you want to own oil and farmland and gold and silver, obviously, and uranium when the world is really unsettled. And 6 months ago, I was terrified of a nuclear war. That was the thing that worried me more than anything else, because we were blundering into that kind of a war in Ukraine. And that was really a proxy war that was, in effect, started by NATO in order to drain Russia to the point where maybe there's a coup and Putin gets kicked out and replaced by somebody that was, easier to manage for NATO and the US. And so we were taking huge risks in order to make that happen. We were doing things like, for instance, selling Ukraine weapons that were capable of striking deep into Russia to kill Russians when Putin said that was a nuclear red line. We were doing stuff like that. Now, under Trump, it doesn't seem as likely because he's trying hard to get deals done around the world. He really doesn't want to fight World War III with Iran, and he absolutely does not want a nuclear war with Russia. And he just, he puts it out there and says, look, we could be doing deals. We could be getting rich. Let's just do a ceasefire right now and start doing deals. And that is so much so much healthier as an attitude for the U.S. president to have than what we had in the past. So I'm less worried about that now. But, it is a crazy world out there, and it is possible that the U.S. gets dragged into something by some of its allies, supposed allies, and that we end up fighting. And in a nuclear war, your investment thesis really doesn't matter, because if you're vaporized in a nuclear holocaust, then it doesn't matter whether you've got gold, silver, tech stocks, whatever. So any kind of investment stuff that we talk about presupposes that we're not going to end human civilization. with a nuclear war. But if the shooting does start out there and people are firing missiles at each other, but it doesn't go any further than that, we just use up a lot of missiles like we did in Ukraine, that's good for silver because each missile contains some silver. And, there's an interesting evolution in the military right now where, for instance, China, it looked for a while like their naval strategy was to build aircraft carriers and go head to head with US aircraft carriers. But they changed their strategy just lately to building a lot of small ships with missiles that are capable of hurting big ships. And, lots of small ships out there firing missiles means when those missiles are fired, that silver goes away. And they have to replace that missile with more silver. And so that's great for the silver thesis. But that's not the way you want to make money. You don't want to be right at the cost of thousands or hundreds of thousands of lives or anything. So here's hoping that solar panels are the thing that makes silver go up, or gold going up makes silver go up, something like that, and not a big brutal war. But again, in this world, you can never know anything about geopolitics 100% going forward. It's just something we have to get through. And so far, as far as Trump's first few hundred days, he seems to be doing things correctly. And he may not succeed, but at least he's trying for the right things.
We've got this judicial overreach going on. He's won a few battles. He could get rid of the people in Venezuela, the gangs out of TDA gangs. They can get rid of them, 200,000 or 300,000 that they have protected status. But this looks like it's really getting nasty. Do you envision any kind of a civil war? I mean, they're arresting Congress men and women, at the detention facility in New Jersey, and they're also charging them for federal crimes. Of course, they charged all kinds of people for J6 that didn't really even commit a crime, but it just really seems nasty to me. Do you get does this make you nervous? Go ahead.
Most of the major countries are close to civil war right now, just because the expert class has screwed up everything they've touched for the last 30 years. So we've got failure after failure out there in terms of policy, and people are just really angry. So populists are gaining ground electorally in major countries all over the world, and the establishment is striking back by going authoritarian and just banning political parties. In Europe, they're trying to ban the most popular populist party in Germany. In Ukraine, in the UK, they're locking people up for tweets. So a lot of crazy stuff is happening out there, and the US isn't immune to that. And it looks like Trump's people are digging into some of the corruption that they inherited, and they're getting ready to actually, perp walk some of these expert class icons out there. Maybe the Kennedys, maybe some of the Bidens, or not the Kennedys. I'm sorry, the Clintons, maybe the Bidens, stuff like that. So we haven't seen that happen yet, but there's a trend in that direction. And there's no telling how the aristocracy will respond to something like that. So yeah, we could certainly have assassination attempts, right? And we could have things happen in the courts where some of the decisions are so outrageous that the Trump administration is tempted to disobey or ignore them, and we'll see. But, as far as Trump goes with immigration, he's basically throwing whatever up against the wall. He's just trying whatever he wants to do, and he's letting the courts sort out what he's going to be allowed to do. So he does something, and then it goes to a district court that rules against him. Then it goes to the Supreme Court, where he's hoping they will rule in favor of his policies in enough cases to give him a set of policies he can use going forward. So it seems like the second year of the Trump administration is going to be very different from this year, because they will have a set of policies that they're allowed to use, that the Supreme Court says are okay, and then they're going to be going for it. They're going to be, whatever it is, whatever they're allowed to do, they're going to be doing it at scale. And I think there will be a lot of deportations. There will be a lot of arrests of people who are here illegally and commit crimes and things like that. And you know, if you want to be a functioning civilization, you have to have your borders under control. And that means you have to have immigration laws that are enforced. So this is going to be brutal. There's going to be a lot of kind of heart-wrenching videos that come from this, but I don't see a solution. I mean, you have to have control of your borders or you're not a real country. And we, for 4 years, did not have control of our borders. And so what's going on now with immigration in the US is basically the inevitable result of open borders for a whole presidential term. 10 million people, most of whom and most of them are military-age men who are completely unvetted. You can't do that if you want to have a functioning, coherent civilization. And I think we were one presidential term away from just civilizational collapse. And so we stopped it just in time. But the fixes are not going to be pretty, and they're not going to be clean and simple. So it's going to be really messy. There will be some chaos, but there's no alternative. We have to go through the chaos. This is sort of the same thing with monetary policy, right? Immigration and monetary policy both are going to lead to some chaos that we have to get through. And then we do a reset. We have a new set of laws that govern how those things work, and we go forward with something that's sustainable. So here's hoping. No guarantee about anything. No guarantee that half the Trump administration doesn't get assassinated in the next couple of years. It's going to be very messy, but we have no choice. We got to do the things that these guys are trying to do. And if they succeed, then Trump is Winston Churchill. He's saved American civilization, and he'll deserve all the credit that he gets.
It's just got that bad. I mean, it's so crazy, and that they just had this transgenderism. It's just they just got on that horse and just won't get off it. They just had some girl come in second who should have came in first to a guy who thinks he's a girl, this transgender, and she hopped over on the victory stand. Everybody started clapping for her, and I'm thinking, how is it that I have to think that a guy is a girl? That I have to think that? I mean, you have to think that. You're a bigot. No, I'm not. That's a guy. It's not a girl because he put on lipstick and a dress. But anyway, go ahead.
This was a war on objective truth in a lot of different areas of American life. I mean, these proxy wars where, it's for the good of civilization, but it's actually just to enrich the military-industrial complex, and the gender theory stuff where it's supposedly about some version of civil rights, but it's actually a way of indoctrinating kids to cause trouble going forward. All of these things were crazy things where they were asking us to accept objective unreality, things that just weren't true. And you could look at them and see that they weren't true. But if you can convince people, if the government can convince people that right is wrong and up is down and et cetera, then you're in one of those dystopian novels where the government controls everything and you only believe what you're told. And that's kind of what they were trying for. This was a real attempt to basically just break civilization. And they got close. They got really close. But it looks like the tide has turned just in time.
The mayor of Chicago was talking about he only hires black people. Could you imagine a mayor of anywhere going, I only hire white people? They're the most generous race in the world. I only hire white people. Could you imagine doing that?
Yeah, well, it was like that in a lot of industries where it was no white men need apply. And
can you imagine saying, "Hey, listen, you black people, we don't want to hire you. You Asian people, forget it." Well, because Asians they're just as at Harvard, they got a lawsuit against some of these big Ivy League schools. They don't want Asians and they don't want white people. So I don't just what we got was this, this DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is really racism. I mean, really, what it is racism. Black lives matter. No, that's Marxist lives matter. They don't care about black people. They don't care about black people. They care about houses and grift. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, this was I get the impulse to redress the wrongs of the past. That's a legitimate impulse, but you can't do it with massive race-based and gender-based discrimination, because it's just not politically possible, for one thing, and then it perverts a society. It really changes the morality of a society when that is official policy, right? So you can't do that and still be a successful culture. You have to be a meritocracy. That's the only approach that works for a civilization that also wants to have individual freedom, right? So, we're going back there again. We're taking steps in the right direction. We're reimposing meritocracy on a lot of different parts of the country, and not a moment too soon.
Trump is talking about how he brought in, this is amazing. You never heard this from Biden, but you have Trump come in, and Martin Armstrong's framing it because a lot of companies are leaving Europe. A lot of people, a lot of investments leaving Europe. A lot of gold is leaving Europe because they think they're going to have a war. He thinks for sure his Socrates computer says it's going to be a war. But Trump says he's brought in at least $10 trillion in investments. Can we collapse if we're bringing in that kind of investment into America? Is the collapse scenario something that has been put off with that?
Well, I think we borrowed so much money that no matter what happens, the currency crisis part of this story is baked in the cake. But what Trump is doing is phenomenal, because he's basically the alpha male of the world right now, and everybody wants to be on his good side. So wherever he goes, the foreign leaders know that the way you make Trump happy is to announce some big investment in the U.S. So the whole world wants to build factories here and invest in AI projects and everything, and that's, a lot of capital flowing in from the rest of the world is extremely helpful. So I think there's a scenario in which, we have the currency reset, which, by the way, they could do. Maybe they're smart enough to do it sooner rather than later and just get it over with. And then we end up with North America being the healthiest economy in the history of the human race, because we've got everything we need here. We've got massive natural resources in Canada. We've got capital markets and technology in the US, and we've got a really productive workforce in Mexico. And then we've got two big oceans on either side of us to protect us. So it's completely possible that as an economic entity, North America 10 years from now is the best thing that's ever been. And, it's nice to say optimistic things every once in a while. I'm not used to that. Usually I'm gloom and doom in the short and intermediate terms.
What keeps you? Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it feels good to say optimistic things every once in a while. I don't get to do that very often.
The 10 trillion brought in, it's hard to collapse when you're bringing money into the country. Armstrong is saying that it's bad. They're not going to have peace. Trump's talking nice about it. He's trying to be helpful and encouraging, but I just don't think, but it sounds like he's going to just be out. At some point, he's going to go, okay, I've had enough. I tried to bring you a peace deal. I worked at it, and neither one of you knuckleheads, Russia or European or Ukraine, which is really at NATO, which could be one less member, U.S. I hope. But you knuckleheads want to have a war. We'll have at it. Well, there you go. And but we would end up doing well. Listen, if Europe goes down, that's going to affect the whole world. But we could end up at least better off than Europe, right?
Oh, Europe is committing cultural suicide, and it's totally self-inflicted. It's the strangest thing to watch. They didn't have to have open borders to the extent that they did, and they don't have to be fighting proxy wars against Russia. Russia's not going to invade Europe. Who has a bigger economy, Russia or Germany? The answer is Germany by far. But what about Russia and France? The answer is France. France has a bigger economy than Russia. They are not an existential threat, or Russia is not an existential threat to an economic bloc that is like 5 times its GDP. There's no way they could buy enough weapons to take over Europe. But I think the rationale now for Europe suddenly becoming really warlike is that they know they've screwed up their domestic economy.
Yeah.
And they're looking for a foreign distraction. They want Putin to be the next Hitler that everybody's afraid of invading, to distract their populace from the fact that they screwed up everything in sight. And, the Europeans, they haven't been very smart so far, but it looks like they're coming around. It looks like they're getting clearer-eyed about the mess that their governments have created. And
which is why all this populism has popped up.
Yes, yeah. So every one of these countries now has a Donald Trump, who is either the second or first most popular politician in the country. Marine Le Pen in France, they used lawfare to get her out of the picture, but she'll be back. Nigel Farage in Britain, he's basically Donald Trump with a British accent. And in Germany, the Donald Trumpy party, the populist party, is either first or second most popular in all the polls, and they're trying to ban that party. So, the guys in charge are going full-scale dictator in Europe, but the people aren't buying it. So we'll see what happens. See, that's where, if there's a civil war, I think it's more likely there than in the U.S. And I think Britain is a candidate, Germany is a candidate, France is a possibility. Some parts of Eastern Europe are who are being forced to obey EU rules, but really don't want to. That's a powder keg too. So I think Europe is going to be mostly bad news until the populists win a bunch of big elections. And I think the U.S. is potentially mostly good news. I think the Supreme Court settles the immigration thing, and then we just get implementation of a lot of Trump's campaign promises. And for 2 years, until the next midterm elections in the U.S., stuff gets done. So we'll see. Don't want to be too optimistic, Well, or put it this way. Hope for the best, but plan for the worst, including with the U.S. And that means invest in real assets and get out of financial assets and basically become a prepper across the board. Kind of do what you're doing, Greg. Have some land that grows food and some guns that you know how to use, and you'll sleep better at night.
What keeps you awake at night? What's the one thing you think, if this happens, this is going to be a big problem? What keeps you awake at night? Last question.
Well, the whole nuclear war thing did, because I have 2 kids. I don't want to see them be incinerated in a nuclear holocaust, and we were blundering into that. So it doesn't feel to me like we're blundering into anything anymore. So I'm less terrified than I used to be, and I'm sleeping better. Yeah, I think that. The financial world is going to get very chaotic for the next few years, but I think that's an opportunity. If you're well positioned in precious metals, you make a lot of money during that kind of chaos.
Or just not lose a lot of money. There's going to be a lot of people. A lot of people are going to lose a lot of money.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of people are going to lose a ton of money because look what is there, like $20 trillion of treasury bonds in the hands of people in their investment accounts and their retirement accounts. Those things are going to get a lot less valuable going forward. So the people who have pensions that they're counting on and who have quote unquote safe portfolios of mostly government bonds, they're going to be made a lot less rich than they thought they are. Or they think they are right now. And see, there's the big problem, because those are the people who really suffer in a currency crisis followed by a currency reset. And, will there be civil unrest when a bunch of pensions are cut in half? Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of these big cities where they have these embedded pension obligations that they can't cover are going to be absolute chaos when something like that happens. When the Chicago teachers and firefighters find out that they're only going to get half what they thought they were going to get on their pensions, and then civil unrest in that case is highly likely, I think. Yeah. And so that's a thing we have to get through.
And one last thing, I said this. One last question. Sorry,
Mm.
your real estate. You were one of the few people that came on and said you're worried about real estate. You had all this real estate that happened, and buildings were selling that were bought for $100 million were selling for $50 million, and they got to roll over all this debt. Is this all part of the interest rate? The 10-year Treasury now at 4.5%, and the rates didn't go down; they're on their way back up. The commercial real estate market. Is that that's a still a problem for you in your book?
Yeah, that might be the catalyst that blows up the financial markets and forces us into that currency crisis, because a lot of office buildings went up using very cheap money in the last 10 years. And then the pandemic hit and people stopped going into the office, and office buildings kind of emptied out. So there are these office buildings that have to be refinanced now. Their original loans are coming due. But if they're refinanced, it's going to be at a much higher interest rate. But the buildings aren't generating any kind of cash flow to cover that higher interest expense. So they go bankrupt, or they get sold at huge discounts or whatever. And then that bad paper, those embedded losses, which are on local and regional banks, will blow up a lot of the local, regional banks, and then we'll have a banking crisis. And that's the catalyst for the next recession, the next equities bear market, the next big government bailout. This is all very easy to envision, starting from the premise that real estate is kind of screwed by these higher interest rates. And unless we get interest rates down quickly and dramatically, single-family houses aren't going to sell from here because they're too expensive to be bought by most people with a 7% mortgage. And so you got housing frozen, office buildings crashing, and local and regional banks suffering through all this, and some of them going bust. So that's a scenario that's, that happens sometimes. You have real estate busts leading to banking busts, leading to equities bear markets. So that's normal in the scheme of things. And the big problem is that we've never had this much debt when we go into some kind of a crisis like that before. So there's just so much potential bad paper out there that a garden variety office building bust or equities bear market could metastasize into something a lot more serious. So we need to be watching that. And maybe we need to be shorting stocks. This might not be a bad time to buy some put options on the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ and have that as insurance in case we get another 2008, 2009 when stocks drop by 40 or 50 or 60%.
John Rubino, your Substack is your John Rubino Substack.com. Is that right?
Yeah, it's at rubino.substack.com.
Rubino.substack. I'll put a link to it in the post on USA Watchdog. Also, I'll put it on in the right through up on Rumble. Also, I just want to put this out there because you can help out John Rubino. He's got a snail mail address. It's P.O. Box 953 Carlsborg, B-O-R-G, W-A 98324. I'll put that up there as well if people may want to try to help you out. You're just you're the new media man. You're the new CNBC. You write a lot of stuff, and you help people out, and people can dodge some bullets by listening to you. John Rubino, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, John. Pleasure to have you on. And before we go, a shout out to my sponsors, Discount Gold and Silver Trading. There it is, focused right up. It's 800-375-4188. Of course, the Always Prepared and Block All Signals. These two are basically the satellite phone store. They have, of course, the power generation or battery backup power that you can charge up with a solar panel or your cigarette lighter or a wall outlet. They hold these batteries hold power for a long time. You have the satellite phones, which are fantastic. A lot of big catastrophes that had happened, including the LA fires, and a lot of celebrities went out and purchased a satellite phone because all the cell towers were knocked out. You never can tell when that happens. Also, Block All Signals. That's Faraday and ballistic bags. Again, there's a phone number for everyone that is on here. Clean water. That's the dry element peoples. These filters fit Berkey. 833-379-3536. Weston Scientific. Just don't trap germs. Kill them naturally. This is bipolar air scrubbing technology. Last but not least, a wellness company. Get life-saving meds now. And, of course, we're talking about 15% off and free shipping for this right here. Yes, there we go. Ivermectin and mebendazole. It is the parasite cleanse. That's what the FDA has approved it for, but off-label, you can use it for getting rid of spike proteins, vax injuries, and also cancer. And Dr. Peter McCullough has been on talking about how ivermectin and mebendazole, and these are a few of the things that they're using to kill certain types of cancers. But thank you so much for joining us today. Also, one other thing I wanted to bring up. Just wanted to bring this up. Just so you know, I have a email service that's done by AWeber. You can get involved with it. If you don't like it, you can hit unsubscribe. Boom, you're out. I don't sell the list of people, but every time I produce something, pow, you get an email, and it's up at the top of the page. Right at the top, it says join. It's real simple email. Just put it in there in your name. Also, on the side of the page, same thing, Greg's private messages. My message is just simply that I will send you a link to my latest interview and the page where I do the write-ups. Also, once in a while, I'll send out a offer, but I haven't done that for a long time. But I don't sell my email list. And thank you very much for supporting me with your comments and your donations. Thank you very much. That helps me out. Also, just remember, I do these interviews so you are informed, not fearful, not to be afraid, to be informed. And I just want you to fear not. Prepare yourself mentally, physically, and above all, spiritually. That's God the Father, Jehovah. That's His Son, Christ Jesus. You got to hang on to Jesus because He is in charge right now. And also the Holy Spirit. Jesus said, there be no flesh left if the days were not shortened. So for the sake of the elect, the days shall be shortened. That means somebody's here when Jesus gets back. Hang on to Jesus. Make Him your Lord and Savior. Be the elect. Thank you again for supporting USAWatchdog.com.